Hi everyone, it's Angela Mansfield, your instructor for culturally responsive instruction. We are heading into Module 3, our third module of 3. So really excited that we've come this far and excited to see what you think about this last module. We will be working together to develop our repertoires of culturally responsive teaching strategies. We're going to really pose this question throughout the module. How do I intentionally reach exceptional learners? How do I teach through or with a cultural lens? And with that, I want you to be aware or cautious as you walk into this module, because oftentimes as educators, we're always looking for kind of that thing that's going to make the most difference. And everyone talks about culturally responsive teaching in that frame. And since we're looking at specific strategies with this module, we have to be very cautious that we don't turn these strategies just into a checklist of items to implement and then we're doing culturally responsive teaching. And our author, Geneva Gay, in the book Culturally Responsive Teaching, even talks about this with this quote I love. Cultural responsiveness in teaching is always in the process of becoming rather than a fixed destination or a set of finished skills. I think this is so important for us to keep in the front of our mind throughout this entire module, because we are not going to be just adding to the list. We're actually looking for strategies that we might be able to hone depending on the learners that are in front of us. And so let's take a look at our outcomes for this module. Number 5, utilizing multicultural differentiated instructional strategies. That's right in line with building our repertoire. And we're hoping that we're looking at those strategies that are designed to improve achievement and build resilience in our learners. Number 6 is an important one also. Going back to that concept of we're not going to a fixed destination. This one really turns that and looks at our strategies that we're going to be looking at in light of who's going to have to implement them, and that's all of us. So number 6, reflect on personal instructional strengths and set a course for persistent movement towards classrooms that support the success of diverse student populations through culturally responsive instruction. A strategy is only as good as it connecting with who you are and how you teach. So yes, some of these strategies might put you outside of your comfort zone. So I'm not saying don't push, but what I am saying also, look at strategies that kind of play into who you are as a teacher and your own personal instructional strengths. 7, will demonstrate the skills that typify teachers engaged in culturally reflective practice that supports the success of all students. And outcome number 8 will create learning environments that contribute to the self-esteem of all persons, to positive interpersonal relations, and build resiliency in students. So I wanted to, there are I think 3 slides we're going to go through before we get into the work of this module. And this first one is something I use in my professional life in my job at Minnesota Department of Education. And every time we facilitate a workshop or we bring together stakeholders, or even when we're working within our teams at the agency, we like to start our thinking off in grounding that work in the equity commitments that make the most sense or connect most importantly to the work that we're focused on in that moment. And so in our module 3, I thought it would be kind of neat to take a look at what those equity commitments are that we're kind of touching on within this module. First one is to prioritize equity, and we're going to get into shared language in the next slide of even what equity is. But making sure that we recognize that culturally responsive teaching is an effort to put equity front and center in what we do instructionally and in our classrooms. Number two, starting from within. And so that's really, we're starting from within by starting with ourselves. And we did that by taking a look at our own stories, looking and acknowledging maybe some of the biases that we bring into our practice and what we might have to do to make sure that we enlarge our capacity to look at all of the students that we have in front of us. And then with this module very specifically, number 9 and number 10, we're hoping to improve conditions for learning through culturally responsive practice and strategies. And then also 10, give students option, uplift the voice of students and make sure that we're centering them in everything that we do instructionally. That's really the cornerstone of culturally responsive teaching. So this definition of educational equity comes from Voices for Racial Justice. And in Module 1, I know I shared this with a few of you in your feedback because you were very interested in this concept of educational equity. And it came up often enough that I thought it would be a good thing for the benefit of the group to share with us all. We've adopted this at the Minnesota Department of Education, and like I said, it comes from an organization in Minneapolis called Voices for Racial Justice. And we're just going to go through and talk about those highlighted pieces also as I read the definition. So, educational equity is the condition of justice, fairness, and inclusion in our systems of education so that all students have access to the opportunities to learn and develop to their fullest potential. I'm going to pause right there. And when we read that green highlighted, those green highlighted words, we wanted to think back to that picture of the students or the children watching the baseball game and standing on those different boxes. And so really the goal of educational equity is to make sure that all of the students have equitable access to that same opportunity. In the picture, it was the baseball field and watching the game. The pursuit of educational equity recognizes the historical conditions and barriers that have prevented opportunity and success in learning for students based on their races, incomes, and other social conditions. Eliminating those structural and institutional barriers to educational opportunities requires systemic change that allows for the distribution of resources, information, and other support depending on the student's situation to ensure an equitable outcome. And so when we are looking to implement specific strategies of culturally responsive teaching, that's one way, if you think of your spheres of influence, that's one way that we as educators, as teachers, can distribute resources, information, and support to our students in a way that helps eliminate structural and institutional barriers. We won't necessarily, with strategy number A, interrupt or eliminate all of the barriers and structural or institutional that are holding our children back, but we want to make sure that we're choosing strategies that will create the biggest impact within the sphere of influence that we have right there immediately in our classroom. So Elena Aguilar is a coach, and I believe I've shared some of her work with you, the Spheres of Influence, for example. She also has this wonderful graphic that I've used in my job coaching educational leaders and teachers and the such. And she calls it Minding the Gap, and really it's a way to identify specific learning needs. In this case, she's really talking about the learning needs of the individuals that she's coaching or the leaders that she's working with. But you can also translate this into identifying the learning needs of our students, which will also help us think of what is the best strategy to meet those individual needs that each student might have. So the easiest ones to identify an answer to really lie in that skill category and the knowledge category. So when there's a skill gap or a knowledge gap, it's typically easier to identify and therefore find some sort of intervention or some sort of resource or support to meet the needs of the individual learners. So typically, as educators, we see those very first and foremost when we think of a gap in needs. The ones we want to also consider are those four underneath. So capacity gaps, will gaps, cultural competence gaps, and emotional intelligence gaps. So with capacity, of course, we're talking about time and resources, and those are relevant to our learners as well. Do they have enough time to finish their project? Are the resources there for them to finish it with quality? We also want to think about capacity in the sense of, do they have the emotional and physical things they need to be successful? And so we think back towards Maslow's hierarchy and just the basic needs that people need addressed in order to be successful, coming anywhere from psychological needs, safety, belongingness and love, their esteem needs, and self-actualization. And so those all really fall into that concept of gaps in capacity, and being able to recognize what some of those gaps in capacity our individual students might be bringing, and how might we best kind of mitigate those needs. So our will gaps include, of course, desire, motivation, passion, commitment, engagement, and interest. And these are just trying to get our learners involved and engaged in what it is that they are learning. Sometimes they just don't like math. And so how do we get them to kind of build that will to get into the work that we're trying to present in front of them? And then cultural competence, of course, that rings loud and clear in a class on culturally responsive teaching. With this, we're really keying in those relational skills. So having the competence, or teaching them how to understand how to relate between teacher and student to student, and student to teacher, and building their repertoire of strategies, but then also making sure that we're choosing strategies that might best fit the needs that they have. And then finally, emotional intelligence really connects nicely in our language of education with social and emotional learning, and making sure we recognize that sometimes for some students, there may be some gaps in their awareness of how to just relate to people. And so making sure that we find a way to meet those needs as well. So this week, jumping into the work, and I keep saying week and I mean to say module, so apologies for that. Of course, you know you have a ton of reading to do once again, so I didn't create a slide specific to the reading, but you have chapters in Gay and Gorski. We're going to finish out both of those books, and then there's two articles in Moodle that you'll find links to, the Nito article and Jovan article. Maybe it's Govan. There's also this time required viewing of The Power of an Illusion. And what I really want you to do is choose one of those episodes to kind of dive into. If you chose one already from Module 1, then choose another one, because they're all amazing. And you really want to, I would really love to make you watch all three, but that would take a lot of time, especially when you have a ton of reading. So please choose one, dig into it, and I hope you'll enjoy them as much as I do. Every time I watch them, I walk away with new and wonderful learning from them. You also have two forums that we're closing the modules out with. Forums 5 and Forum 6. You want to make sure with Forum 5 you're choosing one of those three questions at least to really focus in on responding. But of course, if you want to kind of go ahead and do more, you may, but definitely choose one of them. And then Forum 6 is a little bit different than our past forums, in that since we're at the end of our journey together, I really want you to take Forum 6 to reflect on your understanding, where you were when you entered the class, and then where you are right now. And of course, because this isn't a final destination, we are all still on this journey. But I want you to think about, how have you changed? Where are your big ahas? What are your big takeaways? Where have people maybe helped you see something different? Or maybe it's the resources and the texts that you might have really enjoyed or helped you kind of navigate this world of culturally responsive teaching. So I want you to share your epiphanies. I just love that word, epiphanies, and that's exactly what I want you to do. What were your catalysts to them? So what caused those epiphanies that you have? And what do you anticipate their impact are going to be on your future practice? What did you learn about culturally relevant teaching that will affect your practice? What will you do differently? It could be in your daily lessons, assessments, interactions with students, families. What will you be able to use in your practice that will help you provide rigor, relevance, and relationships with students? How might you inspire change, expand your ripples of influence, and what are your plans for continued growth? And so one big piece of this that's different than our past forums is that I want you to use this, of course, to start conversation in our discussion forum, but you also can kind of use it as a cheater for your journal interest, in your journal post this module. So you can either copy all of your journal reflection this week into the forum, or you can have pieces of your journal learning log that you put into Forum 6. The difference that I want you to consider, you will have to do some editing, because the difference is between Forum 6 and what you do for your journal and learning log is the audience. So Forum 6 is really meant for you to be starting a conversation with your peers in the course, whereas your journal and learning log is really your reflective mode. So you're kind of having that dialogue within yourself and asking yourself the questions, identifying what's important for you. So think of voice as being what separates Forum 6 from that learning and journal log. All right, so we are going to get into the words now. Really, literally the word from the Bible, and then also the words that I've chosen, the quotes that I've chosen to go along with this module. And I thought that this scripture was particularly perfect to kind of lead off the quotes for this final module. And I'll tell you why after I read it. But as for you, continue in what you have learned and have become convinced of, because you know those from who you learned it, and how from infancy you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Jesus Christ. All Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, so that the servant of God may be thoroughly equipped for every good work. And what really resonated with me in this scripture is where it says all Scripture is God-breathed and is useful for ... And I'm thinking of this course in the sense of everything that we've brought into this course, the resources, the words that you've shared with each other, the feedback, hopefully, that you've gotten. All of those things are useful for something. And so I want you to think about that as you think about your next steps after the course is done, and you're still continuing to implement this pedagogy into your practice. When you think about what you're going to commit yourself to, what is most important from our work in throughout this course, and then when you create the goals as you move forward beyond this course, to keep this work relevant and important to you so that you are most impactful for your students. So then finally, I have just a couple quotes I wanted to share. The first one is from Lisa Delpit, from her book that you see there on the left of our screen. And she says, successful instruction is constant, rigorous, integrated across disciplines, connected to students' lived cultures, connected to their intellectual legacies, engaging, and designed for problem solving that is useful beyond the classroom. And that really is truly our goal. Let's give them instruction, give them curriculum, give them experiences that help them solve problems that are useful beyond the classroom. Another person that I love, absolutely love, African-American poet Audre Lorde, is a quote that I actually found not necessarily from her work, but from the book from Zaretta Hammond, Culturally Responsive Teaching in the Brain. And the quote is, when I dare to be powerful, to use my strength in the service of my vision, it becomes less important whether I'm afraid. And I know some of this is sometimes hard, difficult, because you are actually creating the ripples in influence that need to happen in your schools, in your districts, in the settings that you work in. And so less important whether you're afraid, and more important that you're daring to be powerful. And then finally, from Paulo Freire, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, education either functions as an instrument which is used to facilitate integration of the younger generation into the logic of the present system and bring about conformity, or it becomes the practice of freedom, the means by which men and women deal critically and creatively with reality and discover how to participate in the transformation of their world. And my hope is that through transforming some of your practice, that we're also helping to empower students to be able to use their voice, their choice, to help transform our world as well. I am so thankful for this time that I've had with all of you. I want to reiterate that if there's anything you want to discuss or any questions that Module 3 brings up, or just even moving past Module 3 and into your future, if there's anything I can ever help you with, please don't hesitate to reach out. You have my cell phone number, my email through Bethel, and I'm so happy to talk through anything with you and do the best I can to support you and your journey. Thank you so much for all the work that you've put in. I can't wait to see your final thoughts in this Module 3, and happy learning. Thank you.